The 7 films in the program are The Heatwave by Seth Mohan, Aniksha by Vincent Toy, Klebs by Halima Wardiri, Kashif by Haris Kadri, Showstopper by Jakil Kambo, Bad Omen by Salar Pashtunyar, and Jala by Tayama Al-Kamli, and produced by Shant Joshi. Today with us, we have Seth Mohan with The Heatwave, Salar Pashtunyar, director of Bad Omen, Vincent Toy, director of Aniksha, Shant Joshi, producer of Jala, and Haris Kadri, director of Kashif. So welcome everyone to the Q&A. I'll start us off with the first question, which is kind of a more broad. How did you first get the idea for your film? And I'll start off first with Seth with The Heatwave.
Sure. Thanks, Ali. So the idea for the short film came from real life. This happened to my partner and I. We were in quarantine together, and it was the first heat wave that happened in May, and we did not sleep for 2 nights, and it was terrible. I mean, terrible given the context of things, that we couldn't really go anywhere. We couldn't, travel outside of out of our homes, really. That was kind of the early part of the lockdown, so things were still much more intense. And so on the 3rd day, we decided to pitch a tent in our backyard, and we spent the night in our backyard in a tent. And the interesting thing is that we actually aren't really big campers. The only reason we have a tent in the first place, because summer previously we had gone camping for the first time with our friends who are really into camping. So we had bought all the gear, but we never really used it after. And this time, we had the tent. Why don't we just use it? And actually, camping in the backyard was one of the most kind of beautiful moments that I have had in our home. And I think just having that memory kind of spurred me to create it and turn it into a short film. And obviously, things were fictionalized, but it definitely was inspired by true events.
That's a sweet story. And now over to you, Vincent. How did you get the idea for Aniksha?
I wanted to shoot an industry in Mauritius, and the call center right now is a booming industry. It's one of those where it's kind of in a transition towards more like industrial industry to moving to something that's let's say more technologically inclined. So the call center was right in the middle of that. It's kind of, you need workers calling. It's very a day-to-day job, but at the same time, there's some skills involved, interpersonal speaking. Mauritius has always been heavy industry focused, sugarcane, textile, tourism. And now they're moving on to become this other thing. And that transition was super interesting to document. A lot of external powers coming in the island to control those industry. And Mauritius has been colonized by French, British, Dutch. So long history of colonization and people coming in from different walks of life, ex-slaves, colony, also from India, the coolies, and Chinese workers. So a big mismatch. And that was really what I wanted to focus on, the industry. That's where I started to look into a story around this call center industry.
It's very interesting to learn more about it and see the industry in the film. And now over to you, Haris.
Yeah, actually, I wrote the film as a part of my 4th year project at York University. How I came about writing it was this piece that I was working on since 2nd year, and it kind of took form in the shape of some coming of age stories that I grew up watching. And then what happened was that actually the original story was set in New York, and my family owned a bodega in New York back in the 80s, and this similar situation of a robbery has happened quite frequently at the store. So I kind of imagined it as if what if I was in that position with my dad instead of him with his brother. And then it just kind of took form in a strange way. through the writing process. But that was pretty much it.
Nice. Yeah, it's a very interesting dynamic in the coming of age story. And Solar, how did you get the idea for Bad Omen?
Well, the film is quite personal to me, and majority of my life I lived back home in Afghanistan. I have recently moved in. By recently, I mean like 10 years. So when I was 19, I moved to Canada. And the reason I wanted to make this film or focus on this subject was I'm raised by a widow. So I lost my father a long time ago, and then we were like dependent on my mom, who raised us and did everything she could. And the media and the political landscape, everything focused on the war, but not the effects of the war, especially the widows. And we barely hear anything like anywhere, whether it's in a cinematic universe or whether it's news or political landscape. It's all about how many people have been killed, how many insurgent versus how many soldiers, but rarely anybody focuses on the civilian life. So my approach was to kind of showcase the civilian life, because we have over 2 million widows in Afghanistan and barely we hear anything about it. So living with that and then seeing people kind of advocate for war to continue without any resolution. So it was a sense of frustration as well with these people. And I wanted to kind of be like, because it's hard to convince people when you're speaking to them. It's way easier to show them the reality of the thing. So that's why Bad Omen became Bad Omen.
It's definitely a very unique perspective. Thank you. And Shant, how did the idea of Jala come up?
So Tiama was the one who came up with the idea. Tiama was in the middle of developing a feature project called Jala, which was almost a trilogy of stories around the growth of this young girl coming up from Dubai, moving to sort of Canada, and finding her footing, in that space. And one of the first things that we discussed in that trilogy of stories was this concept of a young girl, sort of struggling with the fact that she had hairy legs, and what that means for someone at that age, and how they sort of find their own identity in rebelling against their parents, rebelling against sort of everything else, just for this image of beauty. And so we took that kernel of an idea and we made it into something that was on its own, that stood on its own, that didn't rely on the other elements of the story. And sort of we built this synchronized swimming dream that Jala has. She dreams to be a synchronized swimmer, and so she needs to shave those legs, otherwise it's never going to happen, basically. So that was the idea. Yeah, that was put together.
Very nice. Yeah, it's definitely, I remember being that age and going through that. It's a very sweet moment to show on film. And I'll just hand it over to Anya.
Sure. I guess for Vincent, Mauritius is such a cool backdrop. I'm just wondering, what was it like to shoot there? And did you have resources on the ground? And how did you go about doing that?
So basically, in 2018, we prepared the pre-production. So everything was done remote. We were a little bit ahead of our time in that respect. And I came in Mauritius with a team of Québécois creative team. So the DOP and the art director. And then we worked with the rest of the team from Mauritius. And that's where the starting point began. And in terms of the language, there wasn't any really language barriers, because in Mauritius we speak French and English and Urdu and whatnot. It's a big melting pot. And so the team was able to communicate really well, and we made sure that everyone had a creative say. It wasn't just we're coming in, the Canadian crew and the Mauritian crew is coming in. So we brought in a team that was able to communicate with everyone, work with French actor Laurent Lucas, who came in all the way from Montreal to be with us. He works in France and in Montreal. And we work with Nishi, who's the main actress. And she was mainly doing theater piece, like sketch theater, comedy. And a friend of mine introduced me to her, and we worked together and came up with the everything that we wanted Aniksha to be.
That's great. You did a fabulous job. It's a beautiful film. And for me, it was very interesting to see this older French actor interacting with the younger South Asian woman, female character. Very sort of reminiscent of some sort of, well, you said it's a call center, so some sort of neo-colonial atmosphere happening.
Yeah. There's a lot. One of my inspiration was this typical man who comes in a remote country to work, not with ill intent or nothing, but just by the status of, he's a white male, but just by his status, he comes in with a certain power structure, and naturally things unfold.
Very interesting. Sally, do we have some other questions now coming in, or?
Yeah. Pardon?
No, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I had a question for Salar. How was it working with the actors in your film, and in particular the lead actor? She showed so much emotion in such a touching way.
Me unmute myself. Yeah. So working with actors back home was both fun and challenging. It was fun because I had to work with non-actors, a lot of them. So there were things happening on set which were like fun and humorous at times, but also frustrating because we don't have the luxury of lighting. We didn't have any gear, so we were dependent on the natural light. And it was winter, so we could only shoot between the hours of morning to noon. But working with Farishta, I mean, she was phenomenal. And since Farishta is also provider for her family, like she works, she has a job, she's actually trains other women, gymnasm and things like that. So working with her, she could relate to character a lot because since she's the one who's looking after her family, she's the one who puts the food and the shelter. That aspect was coming off Will, which was our lead. It was required by the lead. And then again, her talent was beyond, like, once she got into the character, there was no stopping us. And she realized how much the film meant to me. Like from the get-go, when we started talking about it, she realized how much the film meant to me. And she was beyond just an actress. Like she was actually participating in discussions of locations at times because things were falling off, you were on the go. And they were like, okay, how about we do that instead of today than doing something? So she was adding more than just acting. So having Farishta was a blessing. It was very good working with her. And also all the non-actors, like the tailor in the movie is not an actor. The glasses shop was not an actor. And the actor who is in the office, we had to cast him the night before because the actor who was supposed to show up did not show up or canceled on us. So it was both challenging and fun. And if I could change anything, I would not. Like it just came very well together.
Mm-hmm. That's very, very, very interesting to hear how it's created so on the ground. And Shant, I have a question for you. How did the CFC help you to develop your project?
So working with the CFC was a very interesting way of putting together a short film, because short films are usually, just ideas put together to a script, and you maybe get some financing and you go and you shoot it, and it's sort of like very, very indie. But with the CFC, because it was part of the film program and they were trying to sort of teach you, how to work within the industry and within the system, there was quite a bit of back and forth on the script. It was like, they were sort of like operating like a studio, like studio executives giving you notes, you know, talking you through production, offering resources, lots of resources. Our production office was out of Pinewood Studios, which is great. And, you know, it's just like, they gave us a little bit of funding. We budgeted the way we thought would make sense. We had a lot of hiccups. Our swimming pool dropped out the day before, so we literally like scrambled to get a second swimming pool like the night of, and it worked out well. I mean, it's in the movie. But yeah, the CFC was super supportive throughout the process, development, pre-production, production, post-production, distribution. They were there throughout the whole time as like sort of this studio that just sort of oversaw the project. So it was a really interesting process.
That's sounds like a very interesting working with them, and very hectic to lose the swimming pool at the night before. Thank you for that. And Harris, oh yeah, but no, you go ahead, Anya.
No. I was just going to jump in because Shant had the CFC helping him, but I know some filmmakers might not have had that production backing. So I was going to ask Seth about Heatwave because I know he played more than one role in the movie. And I know it was probably a labor of love, but maybe you could tell us a little bit about that. Writer, producer, and actor.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting when I was watching the shorts, and after in the credits, I see like how many people were there behind the scenes. And if you watch the Heatwave, I think it's like 3 names that come other than the 2 actors. So it was literally just, you know, us in the middle of the pandemic filming something, and you know, we shot this in my house. So not only was I directing it, acting in it, and producing it, I also was the one who was kind of making sure that everyone's feeling comfortable, you know, since it is my space, and like, you know, that there was enough PPE and all that kind of stuff. And amidst all that, like I realized that I was wearing too many hats. And when I watched the film, I realized that I actually made I kind of missed on something, which was my own wardrobe as an actor, in that I had put out a wardrobe for myself, which was a tank top, which would have made sense that I was wearing that in the Heatwave. But in the film, I actually just am wearing whatever shirt I was wearing that day because I totally forgot to change. And I'm just like, oh, I guess it's time to film. Let's just do it in whatever I'm wearing now. So I think, yeah, like it was definitely a set where like I had very, very little support. I mean, it was fun to have friends that we like, you know, got together and filmed something with. So it was a super fun set. But in terms of like resources and support, I definitely, next time I think I will have someone dedicated to produce and not take all the different roles on for myself.
I mean, as a follow-up, I guess for some of you all Canadian filmmakers, and I know Seth, you did this with dispensation from ACTRA, but can anyone else speak about how they've worked with actors and talent from the unions or non-unions, any challenges? And so, you know, maybe we can hear from Shant and then maybe Vincent. And anyone else that wants to jump in. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So with the CFC, I think ACTRA was sort of it had to be either just full ACTRA or non-union basically. And so you know, or I think it was just simply we just had to work with ACTRA, and we had to permit Jala. Jala was our key role. We tried to find someone in the union who you know, fit this rambunctious, amazing kid, you know, with this voice and with this sort of spirit. And unfortunately, you know, I think just we weren't just able to find her. And then here comes Marisol from Ottawa, who's, you know, not only non-union. I think she was apprentice at the time, but she's in Ottawa, and so we had to, like, a big part of the pre-production was like considering like, okay, we have to tutor her, and so we have to like divvy out time, and because she was coming out from Ottawa to Toronto, and then we ended up making it work. Marisol and her mother Roanne were just amazing. She was a great spirit on set. Actor worked with her well, and hopefully she'll join the union soon and be a big star, because I think she was just fantastic in the role.
Maybe Vincent, maybe you can talk about it because you were off in a different country.
Yeah, so Laurent Lucas, who's an UDA actor, the film was, we had the grants from the Canada Arts Council and the Conseil des Arts et Lettres du Québec. So we had to, well, we didn't have to work with a UDA actor, but in order to get the CRTC certification, we needed a certain point. So Laurent Lucas was the ideal choice because he was French and Canadian. The producer of the film, Guillaume Collin, is much better at me at explaining this, but I will try to to explain. So we got the CRTC certification because of the point system, and then we worked with local Mauritian actors and some that was just part of the call center. For example, the pandit in the movie, in the film, is a real pandit, so a mix. And yeah, so we just had to figure out the right amount of points so in order to get the CRTC to be approved as a Canadian film. And yeah.
Okay, excellent. Does anybody else have any other tips about working with guilds, or specifically in the short scenario that they want to jump in on, or should we move to the next question? Anyone else? No? Okay. Sally, do you have another question you want to jump in on?
Yeah, sure. I had a question for Harris about in your film, your lead is kind of going between, as you've mentioned, it's a coming of age, you know, in his relationship with his father and his relationship with his friend. Could you talk a bit about, I guess, working with the actor and the actors in showing these conflicting relationships or conflicting times in his directions he's going?
Sure. I think one of the notes that I mentioned, first of all, like, I was so thankful to have such an amazing cast. Zach, who played Gotchif, was just perfect for it. When I met him, I was like, okay, this is the person doing it. But I always mentioned to him that it's like the end of the film isn't meant to be like there's this magical reconnection with his dad and everything is great and everything is perfect. Like, no, it was just more so like, yeah, in the beginning of the movie, you're not even talking to your dad. You're not gonna, like, you don't want anything to do with him. But by the end, you're having like small talk. And if that's the best it is, like, if that's the best it gets, then that's the best it gets. But there's still some sort of relationship. So it was always supposed to be like this nuanced thing. It wasn't supposed to be like this great happy ending, but just like a turning point and moving forward slowly to just progress and grow.
Yeah, that's true. It's definitely very interesting, the subtle kind of progression or difference from the beginning of the film. And then a question that can go to anyone is how did the landscape or setting of your film influence either the story or also the making of your film?
I can go with that. Since the landscape did play a big part in my film, because I was flying back home to Afghanistan and I did not want to shoot a movie throughout in close-up. Although the character is going through so much internal conflict as well as external, I wanted to film it in a sense where we can make Kabul a part of the story as well. Just like she's suffering and she's going through things, so is Kabul going with her. And then the way we were placing the camera, we were placing it in the sense that just like she's stuck in her situation and no matter what she does, she is there in that mess. So is the city of Kabul in itself that's under the war for consistent these years. So therefore, pretty much, I think 99.9% of there isn't any camera movement. It's all on stakes. So yeah, landscape definitely played a big part in Bad Omen.
Thank you. Very interesting. Anyone else want to comment on that?
I'd be happy to speak about the swimming pool fiasco a little bit more. So obviously a big part of the story for Jala was that she dreams to be a synchronized swimmer, and so we had to book a pool for one of our 2 production days. And the search started with I thought the best way to start would be to reach out to the Toronto Film Office and say, hey, we're doing this Canadian Film Center short film. We'd love to shoot at a swimming pool. What are our options? And I think the date just wasn't working for a lot of the conventional options, and it was getting quite expensive. With while the city of Toronto does provide zero, net zero permits, which means you don't pay for the permits, you do have to pay for staff, and you do have to pay for other expenses. And so the conventional options weren't available. And we literally had to go community center to community center looking for pools that worked well for the story. We found one that had good space. We started to get the process going. And then the day before, the bill came in, and it was like, this is going to cost you like $3,000. And that was not in our budget, nowhere close. And so we literally jumped into the private sector and found a saving grace. A friend of mine, Eric Bizzari, worked at a swim school called Felix's Swim School, and was basically able to connect us with one of the owners. We negotiated a deal. The swim school is literally underneath a synagogue, which was a whole another can of worms. But the synagogue was so lovely and so welcoming. And we literally, like, the night before, scouted the location. We're like, okay, this is gonna work. And the morning after, we went in and we shot the short. That was that. So it was a bit crazy journey trying to get this swimming pool. It was a bit crazy.
That sounds like a very hectic but exciting turn of events. Does anyone else want to comment on the question?
Yeah, sure. I think finding a convenience store in Toronto was tough itself. And then I was very particular on, I want to find a corner convenience store that reminds me the most of the store that my parents owned in New York. Because I'd one a year ago and I saw it and I'm like, man, I want to find something just like it. And it was a bunch of no's from so many places. And then I was just on Instagram 2 weeks before shooting, and I saw an advertisement, like a sponsored post for this clothing company. And they were like posed and modeled outside of this store. And I'm like, is this in Toronto? So I zoomed in, I Googled it. I'm like, okay, let me just give this a shot. And I met with the owner and he was like, yeah, like this is how much it's going to be. And that was it. But I think like finding a business owner that was welcoming to have student filmmakers shoot in the spot was very tough. And had I not encountered that, definitely the story would have big restructuring in terms of now where is the story told and like what do the characters do. But that was it.
It's the perfect convenience store for the film. And I think, Vincent, were you about to answer that as well?
Yes, so I just wanted to talk about the 3 spaces that exist in the film. So basically the call center, the family home, and then there's this quote-unquote metaphorical space, which is the sugarcane, which is a nowhere place, basically. And Aniksha basically floats between those spaces, and at the end, she finds herself in the sugarcane where she has to take some kind of a life decision. And so those spaces were really intentionally created to have, on one end, the home where it's a very patriarchal environment, her husband, the relationship she has with the husband, and then the call center, which is very similar, but in a different way. It's a man who comes and tells her what to do and how to do it. And then she finds herself at the end of I'm not selling the punch of the film, but she finds herself at the end of the film in the sugarcane where she has to take a decision which would lead her to some emancipation at the end.
Yeah, it's very interesting. that's really interesting to hear, and it makes sense with the way how the film flows between these three spaces. And Seth, did you want to comment on anything about the landscape and location?
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, it was my home that we filmed in, and I remember before I shot my first ever short film, I remember reading Robert Rodriguez's Rebel Without a Crew, and one of the things he talks about in that book is he had the film in his head as an entire movie, like edited shots and everything like that. So I felt like in this particular short, it was a little bit easier for me to do that because I was already so familiar with this space. And because I was acting in it, I knew that I wouldn't be able to necessarily check each frame and, okay each take, that I had to kind of have the film in my head as much as possible so that on the day I can let my DP do his thing, that I can just kind of act with my co-actor, and I'm not going and checking the frame and the monitor, which I didn't. So I didn't even know what a lot of the frames look like until I saw them in post. But because I was so familiar with the space and I was able to visualize, I had very specific, I had sketched out shots, and I had very specific places in the backyard and the house where I was like, this is where I want the camera to be placed. So I think having that familiarity with the space and keeping it very confined almost gave me the ability to be super specific. And in that, it gave me a lot of freedom to then, once I'd done my prep work, I could kind of just like, let the DP do his thing.
That is a very interesting dynamic of knowing the set so intimately, as it being your own house. And then a final question to wrap this up is, how is COVID affecting you, and how maybe do you see COVID affecting films? So, Sean, do you want to go first, or Salah?
Sure. How's COVID affecting film? So we've shot 4 projects during the pandemic. Each one significantly more and more safety restrictions. We had 2 projects that we were going to shoot in October. Both had to be put on hold. Just the case count was going too high, and while we were very strict with our procedures, I think the big thing was we didn't have access to testing at the time. We still don't have access to public testing. We have to use private testing solutions. But just it didn't make sense with the case count so high, and there was no primary urgency to get it going right away, and so we had to push those to 2021. I think the pandemic is sort of helping us focus on development, which has been good. So we've been reading a lot of scripts. We've been giving a lot of story notes on script. It's been a lot more development focus, which has been good. But I'm looking forward to, I think we may be shooting something like 2 to 3 features next year, maybe. We'll see how things play out, but that's sort of, right now, a lot of the features that we had this year had to be pushed to next year. So we'll see which ones end up making the cut for next year.
Yeah, that's that'll be a very interesting experience or it is a very interesting experience to have shot in pandemic, but in several different ways in that pandemic. And Salar, do you want to talk about that a bit, your experience or the experience of the film?
Yeah, sure. Well, my film, I shot it in end of December last year. So by the time I was back in Canada, I was going into the post. That's easier to do. It's like Zoom became a big thing of our life and Skype. So it was easier to manage from that aspect. But again, I believe as short filmmakers and aspiring independent filmmakers, there's not much grants anyway. So we already take so many risks to make our films, whether it's flying to another country to shoot your stuff or just do it here with minimum crew possible. So I think filmmakers will find ways to get their films made if they need to, because we have already been doing exactly that. And other than that, I think the only fortunate part of this pandemic was I think we had a lot of time to develop more work. So like I'm currently busy in developing the future version of Vedom, and that I plan on going next year or the year after to shoot. So yeah, I think it has its positive, but just like Seth's film, it's like you just make the best of whatever situation you are in. So yeah, that's what my approach has been.
Definitely, and I'll be excited to see the future. And Harris, do you have want to say anything?
Yeah. Like coming straight, I just graduated in June, so coming out of film school, it's been kind of like, oh, this is a really weird time to graduate. But like the same thing where it's like, okay, now I have all this time to write whatever I want to write. And then you slowly lose motivation to do anything because you're like, well, I'm not going to be shooting this anytime soon. So you go like, okay, I'm going to look at the script tomorrow and then next week. And then it becomes December. And I was supposed to like set myself accountable to writing this much sooner. I feel like I don't feel like it's responsible for myself to shoot right now, considering I live with my parents and everything. So it's just been like, okay, when it feels safer to shoot, maybe I can try something. But up until now, we're just vibing. Literally, that's it. I'm not really working on anything. And hopefully I can write something next year and make something new next year.
Definitely. And Vincent, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah. So in terms of, I think like in a year and a half or less, in terms of shooting, everything will come back to normal with the vaccine. But in terms of cinema, there's probably going to be big changes. It won't be a ubiquitous sight in the city, seeing those big screens everywhere. I think that the HBO, I think, announced last week that they're going to release on streaming, and June is going to be released streaming, and that's a film that you have to watch on the big screen. So I think like independent filmmakers will have a hard time to show their film. I mean, festival like yours is ideal to show this type of films, short films. The problem is that the only networking or meeting and seeing people, that was the time to do it, and now we're missing a little bit of the fun, which is a shame. But we get to meet on Skype or Zoom.
That's true. Yeah, definitely missing the film openings and festivals in person. And Seth, any comments about COVID?
Yeah, like I think I mentioned this earlier before we started rolling. Is I feel that for me personally, like creating art and creating films or writing is almost like my way of coping with what's going on, because I feel like there's so much uncertainty and I feel like I don't really know what's going to happen. That for me, it's like, okay, well, I have control over something and I have control over, being able to pick up my laptop and write. So that, and I also have the time, right? So up until now, I've only thought about making short films, but now I've gotten to the point in my life where I feel like I'm ready to take on my first feature. So, I've given myself the task of writing my first feature draft. So for me personally, if I can complete that draft by say end of June 2021, for me, that's a win. So I guess for me, in terms of pandemic, what I'm trying to do is have as much like the things that I can control and focus on that, because there's so much outside of it that I can't. So as much as I can control things, and if I can shoot something at home or write, then I'll do that, and not really consider or not really think too much about what the overall like kind of big picture impact or future of cinema might or might not be.
That's a very positive thing to take out of this time, definitely. And I hope you do continue creating. I'll hand it over back to you, Anya.
Well, I mean, I think we've covered a lot of ground here, but and you spoke a little bit about your coming other projects and development that you're planning to do. And so if anyone wants just to tweak that a bit or ask or respond to what might be a next project or extension of the work that you've been doing, or what are you trying to develop next as we go into, as Seth said, a longer period, and Vincent, of a year and a half where we think that we may not be comfortable.
Yeah, I can take that if that's okay. So up until now, all the stuff that I've ever done has always been self-funded, and I've, so now I'm trying to see if I can work with a grant, like either Toronto or Ontario. So I've applied for a few different grants that the deadlines were in October. So I guess for my next kind of project, what I'd like to see is having some sort of support around funding, and see if I can maybe increase the scale and maybe have some more support on set, so that I'm able to like focus on the things that I really want to focus on, and leave some of the other stuff that I'm maybe not best suited to people who are that's what they do. So I think that's my next step, is in terms of the short film, to have some sort of grant support, and then at the same time continue to develop and write my first feature.
Well, I know our clock is ticking, and I think we've kind of covered some of this already. So I just want to thank everyone. I don't know if I cut off anyone by chance, but I want to thank everyone for participating in the Q&A today during what is a really difficult time for everyone in Canada, and sharing your work with us and being fearless and going after your dream as filmmakers, which we don't want to see you stop. MISAFF is definitely there to provide this type of platform to help you to meet producers, to help you to meet other creative collaborators. And we encourage you to continue to do so. And we'll be watching for your films. And don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Arshad, the programming team, in the future, and let us know what you're up to. For those watching, MISAFF continues till December 12th. There's lots of great films coming up and still on the platform. And of course, the closing night film is going to be very special, so you don't want to miss that. I don't know if there's anything that you would like to add, Sally.
That was a very nice closing. I'd just like to add that there's also going to be a Q&A with the filmmaker Sonia Cole of IMU, so stay tuned for that. And follow us and share our posts, like our posts, at @mosaic_MISAFF for Instagram and Twitter, and hashtag MISAFF20. So yeah, continue watching great films, continue watching the Q&As, and thank you everyone for joining us.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you.